Dr. Sandra Chase earned her Doctor of Medicine through the Medical College of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. She was the first woman president of LMHI between 1995 and 1998, and she was the former General Secretary for Public Relations and the editor of Liga Letter for several years. In October 2004, she was named as President of Honor, and she is now the member of Past President Council of LMHI.
I was first an assistant national vice president to Fred Schmidt, who was the national vice president for the USA.
Okay.
Unfortunately, he suddenly passed away. And then I had to take on the responsibility for the Liga Congress that he had already volunteered to hold in the US. So that was in 1987 in the Arlington, Washington, D.C. area. Then I also helped with the Liga 10 years later when it was held on the west coast of the United States, Seattle, Washington. For me personally, the challenges for a woman being a doctor in the United States go all the way back to my time when I was in college and applied to medical school at a time when women were not very welcomed in medicine in the United States. So I followed the advice of my college advisor and I applied to the two medical schools in the state of Virginia, which is where I live and where I grew up, and to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, which was founded by Quakers in 1850 to educate women in medicine. And I was accepted at that school very promptly, so that's where I attended medical school. When I was installed as president in 1995, being the first and so far only woman president, I made 7 pledges to the membership, one of which was to initiate a newsletter that would be mailed directly to each member to sort of get around any sort of political divisions or within a country in regard to the practice of homeopathy. And I actually brought the first issue of that letter to Oaxaca in 1995 that was published, desktop published out of my office. And then after that, Ton Nicolai stepped in and it was published out of the Netherlands, but it was still being composed in the sense that the writing came from my office and then the layout and all came from his office. One of my other pledges when I was made president was to, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, was to have a membership card made. The card is mine from 1995. But then it was decided that people preferred to have a certificate so they could hang it on the wall and it would be seen by anybody that came into their consulting room. This is the certificate, and at the bottom you see stickers. We also made up a brochure. This one is printed in English, German, Spanish, and French, and that was mailed out. I think that was mailed to the national vice presidents to distribute to their members. Another thing that was done, you're not going to be able to see this very well either, but this is a 24-page, 3-part history of the Liga that was written by Dr. Chand, Dewan Chand from India, and myself. He wrote the first 2 parts, and then I wrote the 3rd part. And it started being published in the spring issue of 2003, but I didn't succeed in finding where the subsequent parts were published, although the part that was published in 2003, it says that they were going to be, subsequent parts were going to be published in subsequent issues of the legal letter. I always planned on practicing homeopathic medicine because I was born into homeopathy. In fact, among my colleagues, I have the unique history of having been born in a homeopathic hospital that existed in Washington, D.C. It's called the National Homeopathic Hospital. And in its early days, it did get money from the federal government. And early in my practicing career, which started in 1975, the Sibley Hospital had both a homeopathic pharmacy and an allopathic pharmacy in the hospital. Of course, that's no longer. In fact, the last time I think I went to Sibley, and that at that time, the only remnants of homeopathy were on the outside wall of Sibley Hospital, where it said Hahnemann Outpatient Clinic. And probably nobody even knew who Hahnemann was. Of course, we do have a very beautiful monument to Hahnemann in Washington, D.C. When I was president of the American Institute of Homeopathy, which was from 1997 to 2000, I planned a big meeting that was called the Celebration and Rededication of the Hahnemann Monument. So the meeting was held in Washington, D.C. in a hotel that was within walking distance of this beautiful monument, which in my maybe admittedly prejudiced view is the most beautiful monument to Hahnemann in the world. And it was dedicated in the year 1900. First of all, the American Institute of Homeopathy had to do three things. They had to elicit the money, they had to get a sculptor, and they had to get legislation through Congress, because no monuments can be erected in Washington, D.C. without the approval of Congress. And so what they did, since they were all doctors and not artists, they held a contest to find a sculptor to build the monument. The unique thing about the monument was two things. One is the Hahnemann's head was done from a bust of Hahnemann that his French widow gave to one of the organizations here in the United States. And then the other thing that makes it somewhat timeless is that the statue of Hahnemann himself is garbed in academic robes, as if a college professor would wear. So he's not shown in dress that would be outdated at any time because of this robe. So when we had this rededication, I was able, through contacts with one of my patients, to get a mixed, an armed forces color guard. That means there were members from all of the armed forces participating in this four-person color guard. And we got a portion of the Marine band, because at the original dedication in 1900, there was a much bigger group. There were a lot of high political people, and the President McKinley came, because he was the one who signed the legislation. And also the Marine band, which is called the President's Own, was there. So we were trying to recapitulate things as much as we could. But when we had that meeting in 2000, we saw that the monument needed help. So I talked to the National Park Service, because it's under the control of the National Park Service. And we were way down the list as far as anything being done for that monument, behind the Washington Monument and all the other big monuments in DC. So we started a private fund drive. And in 2003, I called the man and said we had the money, which shocked him no end. Then we started the renovation of that monument, which took a number of years, because the work could only be done during the seasons of good weather, for instance, couldn't be done in the wintertime. And then the National Park Service had promised that they would host a ceremony when the renovation was complete. And they stuck to that promise, even though personnel had changed. And we had a public ceremony at the monument when the renovation was completed.
We would like to know briefly from you the challenges that you faced during your presidential years.
One thing that I had made a pledge about doing, which was the newsletter, that became a challenge because the governing body of the Liga, in other words, the executive council, I know the International Council was also concerned about the cost of having the Liga letter published. But on the other hand, even though they might complain about it, nobody ever wanted to have it discontinued during that person's presidency subsequent to my presidency. Yes, so I continued to edit it up in 2000 till 2013, but there were changes. Initially, it was published twice a year. Then we decided to publish a bigger legal letter after the International Congress had happened, and a smaller legal letter at another time of the year. Spring and fall was when it was published. But then we cut it back totally to just one issue a year. So that was the one area that there was challenge about, as far as I can remember.
Challenge faced by homeopathy during that time, anywhere in the world?
There were challenges to homeopathy in different parts of the world. I don't know that they were particularly during my presidency, though. I mean, even in the Europeans had challenges because when they were coming up with that European Union, which they were trying to harmonize the various countries of Europe, there was challenge to homeopathy in that some countries did not want homeopathy to be recognized and others did.
What message you would like to give younger generation?
I think it's important to be a member of the Liga. It's important because that gives unity for homeopathy in the world, which can help homeopathy in individual nations when they see that there are active entities around the world representing physicians who are practicing homeopathy, therefore representing the population who seek homeopathic treatment. And I also think it's important for us to maintain contact with other individuals and nations around the world from a homeopathic standpoint. And that way, when we participate in the meetings, we can meet colleagues from other parts of the world and hear their presentations and their experience in practicing homeopathy in their country and what their challenges are in their own country. And hopefully we can support each other around the world in that way. So I've always believed in the importance of the Liga.
Would you like to share some clinical experiences from your practice, personal practice?
In general, in my practice in the United States, especially, first of all, early in my practice, I did not make a big point of my being a homeopath, because initially I had both regular and homeopathic patients. And then several years later, I sent a letter and said, I'm only going to do the homeopathy from now on. But I had to keep a low profile because early in my time of practice in the United States, alternative medicine, including homeopathy and other entities, was not viewed favorably by the regular people. Of course, now we're back to the same issue again, where there's antipathy towards homeopathy by the government and by some other entities. But as far as the public is concerned, the public is still very much interested in having homeopathy.
Your suggestion to the new homeopath in their clinical practice, what would it be as a homeopathic doctor?
When I first started private practice in 1975, first of all, when I went through medical school, I never said word one about homeopathy. that would have had me ushered to the door. Early on, I kept a low profile as far as the homeopathy, and then that changed. And of course, there always was a public interest in having homeopathic treatment. And a lot of my practice growth would come from word of mouth. Like I would treat one family's child that had ADHD, and then somebody that knew the parent of that child would hear that story, and that other second parent also had a child with ADHD. And so the child would be brought to see me. And the most dramatic case that I had of ADHD was a young girl. And that's unusual. It's more common in boys in this country anyway. She was so hyperactive that the mom was sitting in the chair across my desk with her legs wrapped around the child's bottom part and her arms wrapped around the child's upper part so that the child didn't tear my office apart. But anyway, I was successful in helping that child so that she was able to continue to go to regular public education as opposed to having to be put in some sort of program, which of course the family was very appreciative of. But, I think it's going to depend on what the environment legally and politically in the individual's country would be as far as how that clinician would engage in practice.